I do think there's a chance that he absolutely does that. I think that's well within the realm of possibility, if not likely. I also am prepared for sort of like these other weird situations that don't give us a clear answer, which again we've discussed on the show before. And if you're talking again, if we're going back to sort of the pressure that could lead Will Levis to some of these different outcomes, right? I think this is where the Titans, or maybe I shouldn't say the Titans, Will Levis. I think Will Levis is actually in the best situation of the four quarterbacks. And again, maybe it's incorrect that the national media thinks that they're the second worst team in the AFC, or that Vegas has them as the lowest win total in the AFC. Like, I think that's wrong. I think there's money to be made on the Tennessee Titans when it comes to gambling. But I think you can leverage that sort of relative sort of obscurity from a like a magnifying glass standpoint. Like the whole world is not going to be studying every throw that he makes the way we're all going to be studying Trevor Lawrence. Is just for whatever reason he's a lightning rod player that garners coverage. I think CJ Stroud has already quickly become some of that. I think Anthony Richardson, we always talk about how the Colts get more coverage than they deserve. Anthony Richardson is a fascinating character in this story of the AFC South. So I think all three guys are going to get more coverage, more run, more ink spilled over them, more conversations about them than the Titans with Brian Callahan and Rand Carthon and Will Levis, because none of those guys draw they don't have that weird sticky thing that all these other guys have. And I'm not saying it's right. I don't think it's correct. I think good, smart football people look at it all very equally. But I think they have to use that up as an opportunity to sort of, I don't know if it's play with the chip on your shoulder. I don't know if it's the pressure just isn't as great to be freer. You've got veteran receivers. I just think that I think Will Levis is in the easiest situation in terms of like all the pressure that's going to be on him is going to be put on him by himself and sort of regular levels of NFL pressure. The other guys are going to have major outside forces pushing down on them, if that makes sense.
Well, then here's the thing. I don't really factor the national media opinions, I guess, into factoring into the pressure equation, if you will. I think all of them. I think all quarterbacks should, and maybe not from this local media market, but all media markets should be putting pressure on them and keep holding their feet to the fire and stuff like that. But the national stuff, I don't know if that really does it for me or anything in factoring in. I mean, if that's what you're factoring in,
it's a small factor. It's a small
for me,
factor,
it just doesn't play into any of it. The win-loss totals and stuff like that don't mean anything to what really happens in the NFL, what really needs to happen. So
don't you think playing on a prime, like people still, it seems like, have no clue of what he did against the Miami Dolphins. Like from not Titans fans and Titans media, but it feels like no one has any clue what he did against Atlanta or Miami. It feels like no one even remembers that those two games happened. And to your point, I don't disagree.
What do you mean by that? Are you because it sounds like to me maybe they're just remembering the 7 other games he played or however many it actually was, which is the bulk of what you should, right? If you can't just, and I know you're not saying this, but I do think fans do say this. You can't just look at the 2 best games of Will Levis and expect the national media to only look at those 2 games. And listen, national media probably isn't paying much attention to the Tennessee Titans in general, but I do think that I don't think that it's a case of they have they're lacking memory and not remembering those games. I think they're remembering all the other games. So I think they're also probably a little bit of preconceived notions about all these quarterbacks too that factor into this, right? So like, I think people are still hoping that their evaluation of Trevor Lawrence is right. I think their evaluations of their pre-draft evaluations of CJ Stroud. And I think there's a lot of that in it too. But I do mainly think that I personally do not have a problem with Will Levis being ranked at the bottom outside of the rookies on most of this stuff. Like the rookie quarterbacks, like if you're taking the non-rookie starting quarterbacks in the NFL and he's near the bottom, I objectively do not have a problem with it because he only had 2 really good games.
And I think really what maybe I need to maybe it's a subtle difference, and maybe I'm skinning a cat too finely here, as we say. But I don't personally care about the national narratives and conversations, but there are folks who do this for money purposes, Vegas and fantasy football, let's say, where they have a certain perception and prediction about what this team is going to be this year. And that, while I don't care about what's on, a morning talk show on ESPN or whatever, I don't care about that. We know the Cowboys and certain organizations are going to get outsized coverage because they have huge fan bases. It has nothing to do with the player or the team. But I do think when you look at fantasy numbers or projections or Vegas totals, like, they're in it to make money. And so their perception, what it does is, for me, it paints this picture. And if you're going to say CJ Stroud is under the most pressure because expectations are highest, which I completely agree with on that argument for him, then the flip side of this has to be that Will Levis is under the least amount of pressure now because the expectations are lowest. Now, that being said, I think it's not even close. He is the closest to losing his job, which by definition you could use as the argument to suggest he is under the most pressure, because if you are the closest to losing your job, then that's a problem. Now, I think there's a 0% chance he's not on the roster in 2025. I think there's a 4 to 5% chance he's not the starting quarterback in 2025. But it's not zero, I guess. And if you're looking at the total, like, CJ Stroud is right. And I'm just using Yahoo just for the sake of Yahoo, because I looked it up. So it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I'm just using it as an example. CJ Stroud, number 5 preseason quarterback in fantasy rankings. Anthony Richardson, preseason number 6. You can take that risk, Zach. I will not be.
I will not be either.
But number 6.
But I understand that the rushing touchdowns is where
sure. Trevor Lawrence at 20. J.J. McCarthy is number 25. J.J. McCarthy is number 25. Will Levis is 26. And
really, traditionally, Ryan Tannehill has been a quarterback one more often than not in his Tennessee Titans tenure. And by quarterback one, I mean one of the top 12 quarterbacks in a 12-team league. So, or he's been like 13 or 14. So I feel like this is just more of I don't know what does it show, like a stat line, a projected stat line, or on this Yahoo thing?
If you give me a second,
the reason I ask is because I wonder how many games these guys factor in, how many attempts, because really this is going to be a different offense, and maybe that is part of it. You don't really know what the offense is. Like, what the offense that J.J. McCarthy is likely going to run, because it's like every other New England offense. What the Cliff Kingsbury, Jaden Daniels offense looks like. Like, some of this stuff. So I just kind of wonder. Well, sorry, where did AJ McCarthy go?
He's in Minnesota, and again, they've got.
Oh yeah, Justin Jefferson. I think that's one of the bigger things. Yeah. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I think those are two guys that you've seen do stuff with. TJ Hawkinson is there, so it may be more of a product of their surroundings for some of these quarterbacks than that. But Trevor Lawrence also has the rushing ability, and now we're getting in the weeds of talking about fantasy football.
Right, all I'm doing is just putting those numbers out there to offer a perception of what the Titans offense will be. And I think they are better than that. I think Levis is better than that. I think the fact that you have Ridley and Hopkins and Spears and Pollard and Callahan is better than that. The offensive line is going to be better than it was last year. So to say that Will Levis, like, if you're asking me to draft any of these quarterbacks where they are ranked based on the numbers I just gave you, the keeper league brain in me is like Levis is clearly the draft pick of the 4. Because you're going to overpay for Stroud. You're going to way overpay for Richardson. Lawrence is probably actually a very good value this year if you're going to draft.
Yeah, Lawrence is probably the best bang for your buck, in my
opinion. And if you're talking keeper, Levis is. If I'm going to get Levis as the 26th quarterback off the board, absolutely, I'm targeting him in deeper leagues, especially the keeper leagues that I play in. And again, I'm not saying fantasy numbers is how we should evaluate these guys. That's not the point. But these guys make a fortune in the fantasy industry to project statistical production. Vegas makes a fortune projecting win totals. And that perception, in my mind, gives some sort of strange mental cover to this organization this year. And that's because you play differently. Like, I talked to AJ Brown about it. He said it to me on the practice field with Teron Davenport. Like, they all know that primetime games are different. You know what I mean? Like, they know that Sunday night football is different than noon on a Sunday, day game against a 2-5 Raiders team or whatever. Like they know the spotlight is different, which affects your brain, which affects the pressure to perform. So maybe it's a small thing, but I think the Titans can come into this season very like loose on offense. They have very little to lose. I understand your point about Levis being closer to like the unemployment line than the other guys, but I still think he has a leash here. And I think that they can play freer and looser, take a little bit more risks, because they're not under pressure to make the playoffs. They're not under pressure to win the Super Bowl. They're not under, there's a little bit of a health pressure with Levis, but not nearly as much as Richardson. And it's not even the same as Trevor Lawrence.
Do you think it's fair to put the team's level pressure and factor that into the individual players' pressure? Because I kind of think you're talking about two different things from where I'm sitting. You're talking about how the team can fly under the radar and the team itself has low expectations, but that's not necessarily means that Will Levis can fly under the radar and has low expectations. I mean, again, he's a Tennessee quarterback, so he's likely to fly under the radar anyway. But I feel like that's two different arguments.
I get your point on that. I see why you could say that, and I agree to some degree. I also think that there's like we all know that like there's a natural inherent pressure that every player has. Number one, because the NFL is survival of the fittest. If you don't do your job, you're out. The next guy's in. Move on real fast, right? Like it's a results oriented business. So in that sense, there's a lot of pressure on every player at every practice and every game and every rep. I guess ultimately you could show progress as a player, put the pressure on yourself, put the pressure on the quarterback, the game's most important position, show progress, and the team still be like a 6 or 7 win team. And that's not going to be reflected on and as a part of the evaluation on Will Levis, potentially. Now, it depends on how they get to those 6 or 7 wins.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, if the offense is atrocious and they have to win defensively and they run the football to get those games, then that is a reflection of Will Levis.